Welcome to the Susan Brender Show. It's all about you. Featuring shows on health and wellness, the performing arts, politics, and people who inspire you to be your very best. And now, here's Susan Brender.
I'm Susan Brender, and this is the Susan Brender Show. Today, joining me on the show is a guest I've had many interviews with. Now, there's got to be a reason, and the reason is that he is one of the most interesting writers, and he's got a little surprise to tell you. We'll let that happen when we start interviewing him. Now, his name is Michael Solomon. He's a former NYPD detective and best-selling author. He's a survivor of a bizarre double murder attempt on his life. During his tenure in the intelligence division, he was assigned to protect the Shah of Iran and Madam Chang of Taiwan. He personally has met 4 U.S. presidents. Now, you can understand why I think he'll be a very interesting guest. So I want to welcome to the Susan Brender Show, Michael Solomon.
Good morning, Susan. How are you today?
Well, I'm good, and I'm really good because when I have you on the show, you give my audience all the information and the education they want and they need to know. So let's start the show with talking.
It sounds like a pill I'm taking to repair my memory. There are things I don't want to remember. You know?
Well, but for our audience, try to remember as much as you can. Now,
I will.
Okay. So here's what I want to say. This is a little bit about your book. What you say, what if you woke up one morning to find all the flags of the free world were changed to the Islamic flag? The Conversion Prophecy is your new book. Mm-hmm. And this book, Michael Solomon, takes the readers through a journey how the entire balance of global economic power will change forever as Islam secretly obtains control of every sector in the corporate world. Now, tell us, when you say that, now, what influence does it have on the world?
Well, not to sound like James Bond, but if one entity or one company or one country, one major economic country, controlled one particular commodity that everybody needs. Let's say that for some reason we woke up one morning and there was no oil anywhere in the world but Saudi Arabia. They could do anything they want with the price. They could cause us and force us to do anything they want us to do. If you woke up one morning and all of a sudden the only clean or fresh water in the world was controlled by one country, or the food supply, you have to realize that, they can just about forget about naming their price. They can just name their terms on anything they want. So what I've done on the Conversion Prophecy is I realized that what if that happened? What if, it all started when they had the bailout in the United States with the sequester and the top money. And we bailed out Citibank. And I said, why is the U.S. government bailing out Citibank when controlling interest is owned by the Saudis and the Chinese? Let them bail them out.
Yeah. And
then I realized that now Citibank gave up almost 5% of their stock and control. And then I started looking at other corporations, and I'm saying, wait a minute, what if this is happening systematically without anybody knowing it behind the scenes? What if terrorism, the way we know it, violent terrorism, is basically a diversion to cover up or to hide what's really going on behind the scenes, the backstory? So I started to put 2 and 2 together, and I started to explore all these sudden purchases all over the world, and said to myself, this could be happening. So I wrote the scenario, and realizing that, it started out as fiction, and then the book came out in May. Mm-hmm. And since the book is out, well, within the first 60 days of the book coming out, Verizon buys out AOL. Yeah. In the book, I intimated that they will become the only internet supplier in the world, and they will control it all. And here it is 6 months later, after that. Now they're going after Yahoo, and it looks like they're looking for other things too. So it's amazing what they're doing.
Well, actually, I'm not sure that it's really amazing, because the fact is that I think I told you about this, that Janet Reno, when she left the Clinton administration, when they were finished, she said that the one thing that she wanted to work on was cyber terrorism. everybody in the government is aware that there is all kinds of threats, all kinds of problems that we have now in our society. Now, in the book, you kind of invent, if you will, thinking about fiction, you invent this cyber terrorism kind of attitude, or let's call it cyber terrorism facts. Now, what can we do about it? I mean, because it's one thing to talk about it, but it's another thing to do something about it. And do you think our government really will do something about it?
No, because they want to give it up. Just think about what's happening today. There is a bill before the Senate right now to turn over complete control of the Internet to the United Nations. Can you imagine the United Nations controlling the Internet?
Oh.
I mean, just think about the things we wanted to find out. Think about things like how many times our emails or the State Department or presently Hillary Clinton's emails have been hacked. And how are we going to get the United Nations to help us out? It's just not going to happen. They're not going to comply with us. I mean, why would they? It's like when they turned over all the Kyoto stuff to them for clean air and global warming, which turns out to be fiction, not a fact. There is global warming. I mean, there's climate change, but man has nothing to do with it, and that's been proven scientifically. That's why they still call it a global warming theory, because the theory is conjecture. There is no scientific fact to prove it yet. It's still a hypothesis. Nobody's proven it. And as a matter of fact, not to get off the subject, but the only way you can do it to monitor the temperature controls or the temperature on the Earth is from satellites. And NASA said that the temperature has been falling, not rising, over the last 11 years, and the ice shelf in the Arctic Circle is getting larger by 11 million cubic miles a year. So it's who are they kidding? So,
now, let me stop you there, Michael, because this has been a great debate for many, many years, the whole notion of the fact that we have global warming. There are many people, and I'll tell you the truth, I've spoken to a number of people who used to say there was no global warming, and that it's kind of a fallacy. But I've also spoken to many who have said that it is a reality.
It is a reality, Susan, but man has nothing to do with it. As a matter of fact, I'm going to give you a couple of quotes, and this is a direct quote from Al Gore, who started this whole thing back in the 90s. Okay. When he was asked once before, after he put the movie out, An Inconvenient Truth, when he was asked where he got his theory of global warming, his answer was Michael Crichton's book, State of Fear. Crichton's book was fiction. Right. That's what he said, and he developed his theory from that. Okay, and that's what he did. If you look, I have photographs of all the NOAA, National Oceanic and Aviation Administration sites where they monitor global temperatures. And if I showed you where some of these sites are, you would scratch your head and say, my God, I can't believe it. One of them is outside of an air conditioning unit that's blowing hot air on Arizona State University, right in a courtyard next to a cell phone tower, which is giving off heat. Okay, and the biggest farce in the world is they put one at the end of a runway in Rome, right at the airport, where planes are taking off and their jet engines are pushing heat against the Stevenson screen, which is what they use. It's a device they use to monitor temperature. The only temperature that you can actually monitor in the atmosphere is from global satellites. You can't measure it from things where you put a thermometer on in a parking lot where there's black pavement and cars are pulling in and out. And that's what you've got in UCLA, where they've got I don't know if it's UCLA, but it's California. Out in California, in the middle of the heat, they've got a temperature sensor right in the parking lot where people are parking their cars, right next to cars. I mean, you can't do that.
No.
So that's where all the fallacy is. And you look at it and you scratch your head and you say to yourself, give me a break.
Yeah. All right, wait a minute. Just a few moments ago, you spoke about Mrs. Clinton, and you said it's sort of a well, what they've done is they've taken her emails and they've kind of made her, well, how would you describe it? I mean, because what's been done to Mrs. Clinton that you agree that she's, kind of been, how should we say, put in a situation that most people running for president would never want to be. Talk a little bit about Mrs. Clinton. How does she play out in your scenarios about terrorism and emails being hacked and all kinds of things like that?
Well, there's a major problem with what she's done, and it has nothing to do. I'm going to be as nonpartisan as I can in this, because I don't like the word bipartisan. Bipartisan indicates there's two policies. One is left and one is right. Nonpartisan means America first. That's my belief. But I concern myself, not that the fact that she's a Democrat or Republican, because I try to be as much as independent as I can when it comes to judging politics. But my concern is that she could have put our soldiers and our intelligence at risk by just leaving basically a door open so somebody could just walk into a file cabinet, which in this case was her server. And that's my concern. I mean, we're finding out all the time. I mean, when you've got the guy who set up her server, and last week they gave him immunity, and they sat down and questioned him, and he pleads the Fifth Amendment 126 times. You have to scratch your head and say, okay, what's he hiding?
What do you think he's hiding?
I don't know. I don't know. Maybe I have no idea. I mean, I can speculate as much as anyone else, but unless I'm
speculate for a moment,
with the FBI
Michael.
agents questioning her.
Speculate.
If I was an investigator, and I was an investigator, working on major cases all over the place, I think he's hiding the fact that he was directed to change or try to delete certain emails that may have put her in a bad light.
Yeah.
Now, I think the government's got her not so much on emails and poor judgment, but I think there's a problem with her speeches and to Wall Street, and her speeches to the husband's speeches to Saudi Arabia.
Now we'll get back to your book in a moment, but since we started to talk about Mrs. Clinton, we have to be fair. So in that case, I want you to talk about what you think Trump is doing, which can be good or can be bad. I'd like to know your opinion about that.
Well, to be honest with you, let's look at the Trump University case. I mean, I looked at that case. Should he have said what he said about the judge? On the racial side, no. I mean, I would have never pointed out that because he's a Mexican, he can't be fair. It has nothing to do with that. What was unfair about the case is that the only witness that they originally had in that case, when they put her on the stand and they questioned her during a hearing, they showed her a videotape that she made saying that this was the best course she ever took in her life, and it's going to improve her life, and that she's made so much money from it, and it's opened up all kinds of doors for her, and this is great. And the judge looked at that and they said, "That's your plaintiff." So that was what their case was based on, and at that point, the judge gave them permission to go find another witness. If that's your witness and you put her on the stand, the judge should have thrown the case out. So do you say to yourself, well, maybe the judge is biased? Yeah, maybe he is. Does that have anything to do with the fact that he might has Mexican heritage, even though he was born in the United States? I don't know. I don't look at that. I think he may have used the wrong terms, but I would consider the judge biased, and the judge should recuse himself for that reason.
Right.
But there are other things. I mean, I listen to the pundits out there and they're screaming, well, Donald Trump went bankrupt. His casino in Atlantic City. I can name 12 casinos in Atlantic City that went bankrupt. Caesar's Palace, so many more of them that went bankrupt. He wasn't the only one. Right. It had nothing to do with him. It had to do with Atlantic City, with the state of New Jersey. They screwed up Atlantic City. Or unless you were on the boardwalk, you couldn't go outside into the city. It was dangerous. So that's, and tourists wouldn't go there. That's why they went bankrupt. And then they started, well, he doesn't pay his contractors. I worked for the man when I was in business. I did some work for him in some of his Brooklyn condos. I got paid. And you know what people don't understand? Because the average person out there isn't a contractor. They don't work for contractors. When you work for a contractor, in their contract with them, they always withhold anywhere from 10 to 20%, something called retainage. And what that is it could be 15 or 20% of the final payment in case there's something wrong until they sign off on it and everything's gone. You may have to wait 30 days or 40 days for your money. That's SOP, that's standard operating procedure, working in construction. Everybody goes through it. But no, they may, the guys didn't get paid in time. Of course they don't. That's the way it is. And show me one entrepreneur in the world who hasn't made mistakes or has gone bankrupt, and I'll show you a guy who's been the luckiest person on the face of the earth. Because the whole key to entrepreneurship is taking chances and sticking your head in the noose. The problem I think you've got a phenomenon going on in America right now. The Republicans have tried it. The Democrats have tried it. Nothing has succeeded. Maybe it's time for an outsider. I don't know. Maybe it's time for a businessman.
Okay, so wait a minute. So I gather that you're talking about the fact that Trump might be president, and if he's president, he's able to do the job. But so many people think that Trump is that it's almost a weird thing that he's running for president, because the way he speaks, the way he acts. He makes it sound like we're going to have more of a problem because he wants to build a wall between Mexico and here, and he's so tough. He's going to do this, he's going to do that. Do you really think he has the ability to be president?
Absolutely. We're going to tell you one thing I know about him. He is an administrator. He knows how to put the right people in the right positions to get things done. And I think that's important. And when you talk about the wall, look what just happened in the UK with Brexit.
Right.
I mean, these people were fed up of open borders. That European Union is an experiment that's gone on for over 50 years, and it is failing.
Right.
It is a failing experiment. And mark my words, you can write this down, that I'm going to tell you right now that the Netherlands are next. And after the Netherlands, I think some of the Swedish countries are going to be down, either Denmark or Sweden. They're going to move out.
Yeah, but they say France is also one of the countries that's questioning it.
France is thinking about it. That is going to be destroyed. The European Union is going to break itself up again. And what do they want to do in America? We got a president in the White House who wants to put together a coalition between Canada, the United States, and South America, and have a whole other. Give me a break. You think I want to absorb Venezuela's economy?
Oh God, I don't know. I mean, even I, who question so much,
and open borders. My God, look what we got now. We can't even control who's coming in now.
Yeah, that's true.
And that was part of the vote in Britain. That was part of the UK vote. People were fed up with open borders.
Yeah. Now, let's get back to your book. So you've shared a frightening proposition with the new political thriller that you've written, The Conversion Prophecy. Now, start from the beginning. The book starts with what? And then take us through it a little bit. Don't give us away, all the stuff.
I won't give it away, but
let's hear.
The book starts with believe it or not, the book starts with a Manchurian Candidate who we start out and we show how he was groomed from birth, almost as a toddler, not a toddler, but as a young man about 10 years old, and how he was groomed to become a radical. He was radicalized, but not in a violent way, in a non-violent way, and groomed all the way through school, and things had to be put in place to get him into that position. There was a couple of murders which were in the book shown as accidental deaths, but you find out later on they really weren't. And I talk about how there's peace in the world, and there's a new Secretary of State. It takes place 15 years from now. And this has been going on since 1990, and I go back and I bring up some of the economic problems that have happened in the past 20, 30 years, and how they've been suddenly cured, and there's peace in the world, and major mergers and acquisitions, and companies are cooperating with each other. There's no rush to market with products, no recalls, and there's now a Islamic Union, like the European Union, of all the Islamic countries get together, and they have a president, and he runs it. And what's happening in the background is you don't realize is that the way Disney bought the land in Orlando, and they set up 50 or 60 little brokerage houses, and they bought a couple hundred acres here and a few hundred acres there, and put it all together, and now Disney controls Orange County, Florida. What happens in my book is that they open up about 900 little brokerage houses all over the world, and money from oil and drugs and illegal gambling and everything else gets pumped into it, a couple of $1 trillion, and they buy up a little stock here and a little stock there at these different brokerage houses, nobody realizing who it is, and suddenly they consolidate it one day, and now they own the controlling interest of all corporations. They start buying them all up, and they own them. And oddly enough, I mentioned earlier about Verizon owning the Internet and everything else, but think about this. In the book, I said that by the year 2020, that there will be 2 national airlines in America. Well, since the merger 6 months ago of American Airlines and US Air, we're down to 3. There's only 1 to go. Right. I mentioned that one auto manufacturer in the world will control over 80% of the auto manufacturing in the world. Carlo Goshen, 6 months ago in an interview in Europe, he's the CEO of Renault and Nissan, said that they are looking to make a major purchase that within the next 5 years there'll be only 1 major manufacturer of vehicles in the world who will probably control most of the industry, and there'll be very little choices.
Michael.
Dinar Holdings, who is a water supply company, now owns, they bought out a couple of major suppliers of fresh water, now owns and controls over 80% of the fresh water in the world. I talked about food companies merging, and now you got Heinz and Kraft merged. Bumblebee Foods was bought out, and you've got other companies, distributors that are merging. So there's going to be major corporations out there with very little other competitors.
But if we have a lot of smart people in this country, and of course there are a lot of smart people around the world. If you know all about these things, why don't they?
They're blindsided.
Blindsided?
This government, the United States government and other governments, have notoriously taken their eyes off the ball.
Now,
we didn't take our eyes off the ball. How do you think Japan attacked us in Pearl Harbor?
Yeah, right. Somebody
was,
yeah.
The UK, Britain took their eyes off the ball after Neville Chamberlain came back after having his powwow with Hitler, and look what happened there. Oh, we got peace in the world. Everything's going to be hunky-dory. We're all going to go singing Kumbaya, and look what happens.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you got to keep your eye on the ball.
Now
we're going to turn over the Internet to the UN.
Yeah. Oh my God. Now, the UN has been so ineffective in so many ways.
They're doing, Susan. Not to get into politics, but
get into politics. I have no problem with that.
Let's get politics. Let's get into actual things that could happen.
Well,
I had lunch about a little less than a year ago with John Scully. For those who don't know it, John Scully was the former CEO of Apple Computer. He was the president of the board when they let Steve Jobs go. He didn't fire him, but he was the one who had to pass the message over. And I said, John, there's one Achilles heel in the entire global economy. And he says, what's that? And I says, EMP. For those who don't know what EMP is, electromagnetic pulse.
Right.
Electromagnetic pulse is a giant electromagnetic wave that will suck the electricity out of everything that's out there. And it comes from 1 or 2 places. The major creator of an electronic pulse, or an EMP, is sunspots. 3 years ago, the world was 3 months ahead of a giant solar flare wiping out the entire electrical grid in half of the world. And the reason I say it was 3 months behind schedule is because the solar flare erupted, and the world was on its orbit, and it was 3 months ahead of when the solar flare went past the Earth. Had it been on a collision course, we would have lost everything. Yeah. Picture this. Forgetting about solar flares, and by the way, the other cause of a EMP would be a small nuclear warhead detonated 150 miles in the air over the say the northeast by a nuclear explosion in a satellite. That can happen from Iran or anybody else. But picture this. Let's forget about all of that. Let's go back to 1989. We're not going back that long. Remember that power failure in the northeast?
Sure do.
Lasted 2 days? How about the one in 69? That in 66 actually, the one that shut down half the country. Mm-hmm. Let's go back to 1989, where we lost half the electrical grid in the northeast of the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And we were down without power for almost 2 days.
Right.
Picture that happening today with everything relying on computers.
Totally.
Nothing in this country will move. Every banking transaction would be shut down. All the ATMs would be shut down. Food would not move because they're all routed by computers. Airlines wouldn't fly. Trains wouldn't run.
Mm-hmm.
Bridge tunnels and all bridge lanes would be shut down. Automated trains, even if you had trains that were running on steam locomotives,
right.
All the railroad crossings and everything else wouldn't work. There would be nothing. Fuel at gas stations, there would be no pumps, no way to pump gas.
Mm-hmm.
The economy of the world would come to a screeching halt.
Mm-hmm.
And that's from, just say, the Northeast Corridor of the United States shutting down.
So how
48 hours.
So how are we protecting that from happening? Because
we are not. And there is a very, very simple fix.
Okay, go ahead.
There is a device that the utility companies can put on their transformer stations
mm-hmm.
That would protect against it. There's only one problem: it's expensive, and
they would rather
gamble. They would rather gamble that it's not going to happen than to cut into their stockholders' profits. Now the question is, what would it cost to fix that if it happened down the road? An electromagnetic pulse would cause us to be without electricity, possibly for, I'm not a scientist,
mm-hmm.
but scientists will tell you it could be a year.
Yeah, that would be.
You want to go out, you want to eat food. You have to
mm-hmm.
go fishing and hunting, and
Right.
And,
well, I remember, when they had that blackout, I was in New York, and I was working, and I was on the roof of a building, and suddenly everything became very quiet, and the lights went out, and we were looking around, and we said, what the heck is going on? And then I remember waiting online for a little bit of food, because every restaurant seemed to close. So all there was just this little restaurant with pizza, believe it or not.
How about the looting that was going on?
Oh, it was horrible. Now, since our candidates are running for president, and they're basically they're aware. Let's just say that they're aware that cyber terrorism. Pardon?
They better be aware of it.
They better be aware. But what can the people, just simple people like you and me and various other people, what can we do? Is there a way? What would you say to my audience about the possibilities of something horrible happening? What kind of leverage would they have?
Not much. I will tell you this: if that happens, though, cash and gold are going to be king. And you look at Katrina. If you were walking down the streets of New Orleans the day after Katrina, and one person had a wheelbarrow full of gold and somebody had a gallon of fresh drinking water, what do you think was worth more?
Well, the water.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So, people have to be prepared. Now, I'm not preaching survivalism.
Mm-hmm.
But, there are these companies out there. You see them advertising on TV, and you get emails from them all day long. We've got food that'll last 25 years. It's freeze-dried, and you should stock up on water, and people are going back, and there's some people that are doing it.
Yeah.
I tell people, you should always have some cash in the house, at least enough to keep you going for a couple of weeks in case there's some disaster.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be that. Look what's happening in West Virginia right now with the floods and everything else.
Oh. Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, a worldwide or half the United States doesn't have to get down. It can be locally. It can happen here. We can have a hurricane in Florida. During the last major hurricane, during Wilma,
mm-hmm.
Look what we've had. People without electricity, without food, and anything else for days, almost a week sometimes.
Horrible. Yeah. Now, let's get back to your book because
okay. I'm sorry.
No, don't be sorry. I think this is very valuable information, and I think people should be aware of the fact that there are dangers all around them. And so let's talk a little bit more about how do people find your book, and what you'd like them to take away from the information that you have in the book, even though it's fiction and it's like a really interesting kind of book. So what would you like them to take away from it?
Well, I think just the awareness of what could be going on in the world, and that, terrorism doesn't have to be violent, doesn't have to be blood and death and guns and bombs. It can be other things. There's domestic terrorism. There's, as you say, there is cyber terrorism. And people have to just realize what's going on. I mean, my question, I did a big interview a couple of weeks ago for a major network station, and it was a business station. And I said to my host, he looked at me and he said to me, "Do you really think that can happen?" I says, "Well, let me ask you this question. Does Wall Street really know who the CEOs of these corporations are? Are they sympathizers?
Right.
Are they greedy sympathizers that are just looking to merge and buy out and make millions? I mean, how much money do you need?"
Oh, wait a minute, Michael. That's an interesting point. Greedy, power, money, all of those things. So let me just say this. The
old Midas touch. Whoever's got the gold control. Whoever controls the one with the most toys wins at the end.
Mm-hmm. So when I
the gold makes the golden rule.
Yeah, there you go. Okay, so let me just throw out those three words again. So greed. When I say that word greed, what comes to your mind?
Power.
Power. Okay, so now let's take a next step. Power. What comes to your mind?
Corruption, because power corrupts.
Okay, and money. What comes to your mind?
Depends on who has it, because there are too many scenarios. I used to say to myself, if a poor man hits the lottery for $1 million tomorrow, he's broke in a month. If a rich man hits the lottery for $1 million tomorrow, he can live for another 50 years. Because he knows how to handle his money. So my theory on money is people aren't educated enough or responsible enough, and that goes back. We've got to educate our kids on responsibility with money.
Very interesting. Now, I just want to ask you this last question before we go off the air, and that is, when you think about bin Laden and how he became like what should we call him, like the master of the Islamic world, do you think there's going to be another bin Laden around?
There are many of them. Not one in particular, but look what's going on with ISIS and so-called ISIL and all the other radical groups out there. I mean, to turn around and say that Al-Qaeda was dead and they're no longer out there and they're contained. Contained where? Mm-hmm. For our government to get up and the president to get up and say that, this was a domestic act of violence. This wasn't terrorism directed from overseas. Wait a minute, where did it come from? You know what I urge people to do? If people don't believe it and they think the Quran is a book of love and peace, then I suggest that they read it. I have, from cover to cover. It'll frighten the living hell out of you. And I've had people that have said to me, well, if you read the Old Testament and the New Testament, there are parts of that book that talk about stoning people. And yeah, maybe one or two references here or there, but not every chapter, not every page.
Yeah.
There are two things that I developed out of the Quran that I use in my book called Kitman and Taqiyya, and what they are. They're two covenants of the Quran which permit lying and deceit by a Muslim to further the cause of Islam.
Wow.
And that's how my book proceeds, because we talk about these CEOs of these corporations pretending to be other than Muslims and buying up everything. And, of course, there is a happy ending. I won't tell you what it is, but I use the Quran. You know what it is. You read the book.
That's right. Exactly.
But I use the Quran against Islam in a sense, and I've turned it around and put those covenants right up against them. And it's a surprise ending. But to me, a novel is nothing more than a fairy tale for adults, and most fairy tales have happy endings. So.
Well, I hope that there is a happy ending. I mean,
I hope so too. I am, I think the one thing that the world hates, and one thing most people hate, and I hate it, is uncertainty. Uncertainty
is right. Now, you've definitely crafted what if work of fiction that can too easily come to pass in today's troubled economic and volatile political conditions. Now, everybody would probably agree that there are a lot of volatile political conditions now. So if people want to get your book, why don't you tell them how they do that?
Well, they can go any major bookseller, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. You can go to any bookstore. You can order it. You can go to my website, michaelsolomonbooks.com or successtalkinc.com. Those are both of my websites. I'm also available for public speaking. I do a lot of corporate speaking and political speaking and different groups here and there. So they can contact me through my website. Or I'm sure through your station.
Correct. Yeah, so Michael Solomon wrote The Conversion Prophecy, a book that is really making a dent in people understanding what possibilities there are when we talk about terrorism. I'd love to have you on the show again, Michael, because, again, you're so full of information and education, and I think that's a very important thing because we're dealing with not a very, kind of comfortable world, and I think it's important for us to know what to look for. So thank you so much, Michael Solomon, for being on the Susan Brender Show. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Susan Brender Show. To be a guest, email sebrender@yahoo.com.